Rachel Martin, finally, welcome to the show.
Dan Harris, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
I've been trying to get you on the show for a long time. So
we did it.
We did it.
We did it.
We did it. All right. So I have a million questions for you, but let me just start with you. And I really relate to this. You made a huge career pivot. 6 years you were at what I would consider to be the pinnacle of radio, the pinnacle of audio, frankly, of NPR's Morning Edition. You walked away. And so I'm just curious, why?
Well, I was done. And honestly, I did think a lot about you through that transition, because you had done something similar. When all the stars are aligned and you're doing this work that you've always longed to do, that you dreamed of doing, and you get the job, and then you're in the job and it's great and it's meaningful. And they were very meaningful, important years to have done that particular job, right? It was December 2016 when I took that job. Trump had just been elected. The news was coming in a fast and furious manner. COVID happens. I mean, it's just so many things. And it felt very urgent, what I was doing, and meaningful. And then I needed to stop doing it. And I know that's an insufficient answer, but it was just in my gut. I was psychically exhausted. And I don't think we talk enough about, maybe in some corners, about how exhausting the news can be. And I have such respect for my colleagues who have been at the tip of the spear, so to speak, in these news jobs for decades. I had been a reporter for many years before that, and a correspondent, and in and out of war zones, as for you. But I could always then kind of go away and recuperate and think about something else. When you're in the host chair or the anchor chair day in and day out, it came to occupy my mind and my body in a different way, and I could not turn it off. And I was worn down. And, COVID did a lot of things to all of us, but I also, in that particular time, found my curiosity diminishing, and that's like a red flag for a journalist, right? Like, that's sort of our bread and butter. That's what gets us up every day. That's what makes us excited to do the work and to talk to people and to learn things. And when I found that starting to subside, I was like, whoa, that feels like something in me is leaving me, and that's not good. I got to change something. And also the hours are real bad. I had 2 young kids at the time, and trying to manipulate my bedtime to coincide with theirs, and seeing my spouse and getting up at 3 a.m, it just wasn't sustainable. So that's a long answer. It's a confluence of a lot of different things. And I finally woke up one morning. It really was like, you and I always ask, like, what was the moment? And some people are like, there is no moment. I'm like, I got a moment, actually. It was the midterm elections. And I just couldn't. It was the day after we were in live special coverage, and the news we were reporting, there were no big dramatic storylines, actually. It was all sort of incremental, and I just couldn't do it anymore. I didn't have the fire in my belly anymore. And that's not a service to our listeners either. They need someone who's got the fire in the belly still. And so that very day, I called the head of news at NPR, and I said, it has been a dream and it was an honor, and now I have to pivot. I got to do something else.
It's so countercultural, not only for the larger culture, but also for the for our microculture in journalism. Once you've got the chair, to give up that real estate, it's people are usually carried out feet first from these jobs.
Your whole identity gets wrapped up into it, right? And your ego gets really wrapped up into it. And you're sort of situated in the culture in a particular way that feels good, and within your organization. And I, for about a year, I'd been weighing this, right? It wasn't until that moment that it crystallized. But I went through all of that. I was like, who am I if I'm not this thing? And to be honest, I really liked going to dinner parties and like saying my name, and maybe someone would recognize my voice. And then I'd be coy and be like, oh, surely no, you listen to me. And, feign modesty, but secretly I'm like, yes, I'm public radio famous, which is not the same as TV famous, but within a certain circle of people, and so giving that up and being able to close the door on that part of my career and to look back at it and be proud of the things I did. But it's really hard because there are other stories that haven't happened. I mean, the war, October 7th happened, and the Hamas attack into Israel and Israel's subsequent war in Gaza. And that was the first big story that has happened since I left. And I was not professionally obliged to read, think, or broadcast that story. And it felt a little strange in the beginning. But then I turn on the radio, I listen to my colleagues, they're doing a supreme job, other news outlets. And I'm like, it's okay. It's okay.
So no FOMO.
In that one moment, there was some. But I have to say, with the presidential election ramping up, I don't want to cover that again. So I have zero FOMO related to that at all. Every once in a while, there are things NPR does that are particularly great, and it creates space for certain kinds of conversations that are tethered to the news. And that's the stuff that I miss being able to do. I still get to have that kind of emotional, existential, meaningful conversation within the context of this new show, but it's not tethered to issues. And that was by design. But sometimes I miss that.
I had an experience recently where the day the verdicts came down in Donald Trump's criminal trial, a friend of mine texted me and said, "Do you miss it now?"
And did you?
Nope. I had a very similar experience to you, where the fire just went out. And I was reading in preparing to talk to you, I was reading some interviews you've done recently, and you said something that I really related to, that you were never, and I'm quoting you here, not verbatim, but you said you were never a breaking news junkie. For you, it was all about the intimacy of the interview, of the connection to the subjects in the story. And that I really related to that. I wonder if you could just say a little bit more about that.
Which is why I was never a great beat journalist, because to be first on a thing that felt sometimes very important, but they are important stories, but everyone's going to get it eventually. Everyone's going to get that story eventually. And I wasn't in it for the race of that. The feeling of being first to a thing wasn't enough to get me going. That's the stuff that garners a lot of attention, and it's a reflection of deep reporting. I don't want to dismiss the people who do that so well, right? Like that, a real beat reporter has spent years cultivating sources, and where would we be if we didn't have important breaking news and scoops that were delivered by brilliant journalists? But it was never why I went into it in the first place. When I was in Iraq a couple different times during the war, and there were a lot of breaking news stories there, right? And I was there in the summer of 2007. It was a surge that we had a big whiteboard in the NPR bureau to just keep track of the civilian deaths from the car bombings, and just another number, another number, another number. The monotony of the death toll, it was numbing for me. And so I started talking to the Iraqis that I knew about that idea, about death, and how you have to compartmentalize your emotional reaction to it when it's happening with such frequency, not necessarily to the people in your immediate circle, but to just people in your neighborhood. And that, to me, is the story that I'm most proud of and remember the most from my time in Iraq. It wasn't such and such car bombing or Chemical Ali, like the trial of Chemical Ali, or, being embedded in Fallujah with the Marines and the Sunni awakening. It's that one story about everyday Iraqis who were just processing this relentless pace of dying. And so any opportunity for me to get to that super intimate place with a person, inside their mind, to get a peek into their own interior life and how they see the world, that was the stuff I always wanted to do.
Yeah, I really relate to that. I mean, when I think back at my time in Iraq, I can't remember any of the headlines I covered. I just remember the experiences I had, the relationships I had. Just, even sitting here, these funny little anecdotes are coming up in my mind. But there's, the being first to a story, or finding out, getting some access to some general or some visiting dignitary or some Iraqi figure. That none of that. I mean, we did do that, but I couldn't tell you anything about it. This story that's coming up in my mind, this is totally random. It's not even from Iraq. It's actually from Gaza. When I was in Gaza in 2002 during the second Intifada, we had a local fixer. His name was Sammy, Sami, and Sammy was a very funny, kind of roly-poly guy, and we were covering a firefight. We're hiding behind a stone wall while there was a firefight going on, and Sammy turned around to me and said, "Let me give you a piece of advice. Never, and I mean never, ever get married." And he just started laughing, and it's like, it's such a surreal experience. And like, that is the shit I remember. I don't remember like what the story of that day was. And I think
Was Sammy married?
Yes, he
Oh
was.
my God.
Yes, he was married.
Did his wife hear that?
He must have had a bad morning. So, but I think I think it may be the case that you and I are unusual in among journalists, because I do think a lot of our colleagues are really focused on the incremental forward motion of stories and who got there first and all of that stuff. And I think some reporters are kind of more in it for the experience or the interpersonal connection or the adventure or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And maybe those are the people like me and you who burn out and go do other stuff.
Well, I will say also that if you spend your time in journalism
having those kinds of conversations with people and like seeking that stuff out, it is emotionally exhausting after a while, and sometimes I wish that I could it's a lot easier to just be like, I need to break this new on here, and I'm doing this and I'm doing this, and it feels utilitarian in a way, and you don't have to, I don't know, connect to someone's vulnerability all the time, then maybe you have more staying power. Not to say I know many journalists who can have a foot in both worlds, and I admire them for that. But for me, it just got to be too much. And then I had to change.
Well, one thing you didn't mention in discussing this career pivot you've made is the death of your father. But as I've read, and I think tell me if I'm reading this correctly, that actually did play a role.
My mom died 15 years ago of cancer. It was a long death that many people understand. And so, and my dad was super healthy. My dad was like, lifted weights. He was a very fit person. And so he had no health issues, and he was the parent who was supposed to live a long time. So when he had an aortic dissection, it's like this heart condition, and he died from complications from that quite suddenly. It was a real shock up until like a couple days before they had to intubate him in the hospital. He was practicing law. So he was a tax and estate lawyer who dealt with like small family farms or bigger ranches. And he was very much a counselor to people and took his work very seriously. So in the hospital room, his law partner has driven up to the hospital from the next town over, and they're sitting in the hospital room. And my dad is telling him, giving him directions about this estate needs this, and this client needs to be called back on this and this and this. And I'm watching this transpire, and I'm thinking, okay, one, good for you, Dad. You're super responsible. That's great. You're like the best lawyer ever. And then number two, I'm like, God, I hope I'm not doing that when I'm in the hospital, maybe dying. I just don't want to have that level of stress, and he was always stressed. He was always stressed. And I know he got great meaning out of his work, but I mean, for me, his passing was just this massive fire alarm going off in my head, because I'd already been unhappy for the last year or two. Like, oh, this has to stop now. Like, who knows what could happen tomorrow? I need to wake up to the rest of my life, because I was not in a good place, Dan. What I didn't say was that I was very depressed, and I wasn't getting dressed. COVID kind of gave us this permission to just wear our pajamas, and I would find myself in this rut. And so my curiosity was numb, but I wasn't awake in life. And so when my dad passed, I was just like, this is done now. This is done. I have gotten to do this dream job. I feel very honored that I got to do it. And now it's time to not do it anymore, because I'm not healthy in it. And I want to be healthier. I want to be emotionally healthier, psychologically healthier. I want to be physically healthier. I want to take care of my body. I want to get good sleep. I want to be awake for my children. I want to be present in their lives. And I don't want to always be obsessing about my sleep, and I was obsessed about it. And when I wasn't well rested, when I had been sleep deprived for days on end, I was the worst version of me, to be honest. I was a bad partner. I was a bad parent. I wasn't a good journalist, and I wasn't a good colleague. So my dad dying was definitely the last kick that I needed to just say, it's time to change.
I feel like protective of you. I kind of want to come in counter program against some of the stories you're telling yourself about being a bad parent and a bad partner and a bad journalist, because I suspect that none of that is really true. But that's the way you felt.
That is the way that I felt. And I think it is true insofar as I can judge that against who I am now. Mm-hmm. And I am just a happier person. And when you feel better about yourself, when you feel like you are where you need to be in your life, then that's what trickles out of you. And that's what emanates into the world. That's what you are putting out there. And my kids they're the people who are around me, who are most directly affected by whatever vibes I'm sending out into the world. So I think they're better now. I think my vibes are better. But thank you.
Tell me if I'm hearing this correctly. So I think there are two things going on around the career pivot. There was this depression that you're very bold to discuss openly. And then also I've heard you say that becoming an adult orphan, and that's the way you've described it, having lost your mom 15 years prior and then having just lost your dad, created, and these are your words, an existential void. And so it sounds like it was a confluence of these two that led you to make this pivot and launch. You have a new show now, but there was actually something in the interval between this new show and a morning edition, and it was a series you did called Enlighten Me, which you basically co-opted your professional perch in order to explore these issues that were coming up out of this existential void. Am I describing all of this correctly?
Completely. So it wasn't the next conversation, but so we rewind that conversation I had with the head of news saying, I can't do it anymore. I need to pivot. But it was like, what's the pivot? What's the thing that I'm going to do? I didn't want to go back and be a reporter. And NPR didn't know either. They didn't know what to do with me either. So they sort of said, here's some real estate on the radio, right? Like on Sunday evenings. Here's like 15 minutes and do what you want. I was actively grieving my dad. But then the second layer to it was this existential crisis. Sounds so negative, but I was just locked in that existential place. And it was a spiritual component for me because both my parents were deeply, deeply spiritual people. My dad was an institutionalist. My dad was this, he was a tax lawyer, but my dad really thought that he should have been a minister. And he was always like he was always the substitute minister in the First Presbyterian Church in Idaho Falls, Idaho. And he would write his sermons out on this yellow legal pad, and he would give them to my mom and myself and my siblings the day before and practice them. That's really where he felt most himself. And then my mom was like an anti-institutionalist. She was just like a spiritual omnivore. She believed in reincarnation, but maybe she also believed in heaven and Jesus and Buddha and the power for your internal energies to cure your physical ills. And she just was open. She was just open. She was one of these people who's like, why not all? Why not all of it? These people seem to have gotten something right, and these people seem to have gotten something right. I mean, if you pressed her, she would say she was a Christian first and foremost, but she had a more expansive definition, or at least to me, the Christians I knew growing up lived in a very narrow definition of what that meant. And my mother's definition of what Christianity meant was, she just had a bigger lens on what that word was and what that faith was. And so between the two of them, I had a very religious / spiritual upbringing. We went to church on Sundays. I sang in the church choir. I went to the church youth groups. It was the center of our social life. My dad was always giving me, religious texts to read. My mom was giving me Thich Nhat Hanh to read. So I had it all coming and going. When they died, I've described it this way before. It's like they had built this scaffolding for my own spiritual life, but then they expected me to sort of build it up, finish the construction, so to speak. And I just never did, because when they were alive, I could just kind of lean on them. And they were my spiritual identity. They built my spiritual home, and I could just visit it whenever I needed to. So now they're gone, and now I'm just left with this like shitty little tent, this scaffolding with no interior, because I never found a tradition that was a fit for me, and I never needed to. So this radio project of mine turned into me actively looking for that. And I just talked to a lot of different people who I respected, who came from different religious traditions and no religious traditions. And I just wanted to understand from people how they had conducted this search in their own lives and what answers that they had found. And it was really liberating. I also felt this pressure. Like, I have these two young kids, and part of my upbringing was this spiritual doctrine that was handed to me, this inheritance. And I felt like I didn't have one to hand my kids. And was I supposed to have one? I didn't know. Is it enough to just say to them, this is just how to be a good person? It's not grounded in any kind of theology? That was foreign to me. So it was a really self-serving project. And thank God NPR was interested enough to let me do it. I learned so much. I had such wonderful conversations with people. I talked to you as part of that too. I don't know. I feel like you're about to ask me, did you find any answers? And if I'm preempting your question.
You are. You are.
Sorry. This is what happens when an interviewer interviews an interviewer. But yeah, I did. I guess my answers were that it is okay that I have found a different way to live in the world than my parents did. It is okay that I'm not a Christian. And I don't know that I've actually said that sentence out loud before. And that feels strange to say. Like, I guess I'm still a cultural Christian because I still want to go to church on Christmas Eve, and I find great meaning from Christian church services and the music and the prayers I've said my whole life. But I don't feel this urgency or this need to indoctrinate my kids the same way. I want them to make their own choices. I want to give them a lot of different tools. I want them to be curious, basically. I want them to have spiritual curiosity. And that was the answer that I found.
I've also heard you say that one of the answers that you landed on after having done this kind of existential tour of duty is is that it's it's okay to make your own meaning, like to figure out you get to decide what matters.
We get to decide. We get to decide. I did this interview with Catherine May. Have you ever talked to Catherine May?
No.
Oh my God, you would love Catherine May. She's this British writer, and I interviewed Catherine. I talked to her for a previous book called Wintering, and then I interviewed her for a subsequent book. And of course, now I can't remember the name of her most recent book. Catherine writes very beautifully about how we make our own meaning. And this is not like some profound idea that other people haven't said. Enchantment. Look at my producer, so good. Catherine May's book, Enchantment. In her book, Enchantment, Catherine May writes about this idea that we get to create the meaning. And that's not like a wholly original idea, but you know how sometimes you hear the same thing from a lot of people and just something, this one time, this is the messenger. And this is the time that this idea really sinks into you. And for me, it was reading Catherine May and hearing her talk about this particular well, this pond attached to this well that she believed to be this sacred space. And why was it sacred? Because she decided that it was. And I was like, oh my God, that's such a powerful idea. And it doesn't diminish it. It doesn't, human imbued sacredness is not any less than some kind of divinely imbued sacredness. Ultimately, it's our choice. Do we decide that this is a sacred experience or not? And so for me, having that, being awakened to that power that every human has, that we get to walk through life in meaning about whatever we choose. Like you can manifest gratitude and appreciation with every step, with everything that happens in a life, in a day. And that felt so wise to me and practical. It felt very practical and like a thing that I could also teach my kids to do.
So what have you imbued with meaning?
That's a great question, Dan Harris. I think it's the really like quotidian stuff. You know, like when I find myself in a day, and it still happens, where I feel a little rudderless, and maybe a little FOMO sneaks in about the news career that was, the accolades that did or didn't come. I think that's how I survive that day. That's how I get through that day, is deciding, how do I make meaning in the time that has been laid out before me today? You know, like what is sacred in this day? And it's little things. And then it starts to sound like really precious and cheesy. But like right now, I'm looking out my window and I have the most beautiful backyard. I never thought I'd get to live in a place like this with trees and in this nice neighborhood. And I got this ugly trampoline out there too. But that is sacred in its own way, because that is a thing that we bought for our children. And I imagine them jumping on it and laughing on it. And it like, now I'm crying about a trampoline, but then I extrapolate from that and I'm like, I got to have kids, Dan. I got to have kids. Yeah. I didn't think I was going to get to have kids, you know? And what an amazing thing that is. So I guess I just try to do it all the time. I guess I try to do it all the time.
In our previous encounters, you've always interviewed me, and in those encounters, we've always come around to like your struggles with establishing a meditation habit, and I'd be interested to get to that eventually. But I do want to say that what you're describing is a practice. That is a practice. You are training the mind away from FOMO, envy, the background static of discontent, and toward gratitude, meaning, and mattering. I mean, you can call that a kind of meditation.
I'm not just shining you on. I've read your books, Dan Harris. Like, I've listened to your stuff, and I'm sort of taken to it. And other people have come out in my life over the past couple of years who who keep saying this thing about the meditation. Did you ever talk to Roland Griffiths?
You know, I wanted to talk to Roland Griffiths, and I know you did for Enlighten Me, and he's no longer with us anymore. And just for the uninitiated, he was one of the lead researchers on the impact of psilocybin and other psychedelics on the mind. And he specifically looked at the minds of meditators and what could be learned from giving that molecule to them. And I really wanted to talk to him, but I missed the moment.
He was an amazing person. I didn't know him well, obviously, but I had this conversation with him. And yes, it was about his research on psilocybin, and then it was about his own cancer diagnosis, but really it was about the power of meditation and the power that all of us have wrapped up in our own head, you know? And so he was another person that came into my life for this little moment with this message. I was like, oh, I need to keep going, you know? And yeah, it ebbs and flows, and I will get into a pattern where meditating is easier for me to make time for, and when I'm really doing it and engaged, and then something will happen. It'll usually be like my sleep is still not great, and so it'll be like me feeling selfish about my sleep, and so then I don't get up, and then that window closes, and then I can't make the time for it again. So it's still a work in progress for me, but it feels more like a touchstone than it ever has before. It was kind of this amorphous idea that other people said was just going to make me better or 10% happier or whatever. And now it feels like I made a real place. I made a real place, and I can go back and touch that place.
I don't know if this is helpful, but, you know, sometimes for me, meditation is what I'll do when I can't fall asleep.
I've tried that. I do like a body scan. Is that the same thing?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a form of meditation. For me, my insomnia often manifests in a physical restlessness. And so what I will do is get up and do walking meditation. And I find that exhausts both my mind and my body, and then I can fall asleep.
I always have a problem with what I'm supposed to be saying in my mind.
So I'll give you a practice you can try. There's a phrase that comes straight from the Buddhist teachings that my teacher, Joseph Goldstein, likes to use a lot. And I will just preface this by saying I did not like this phrase when he first told it to me. But the phrase is, there is a body. And that sounds to me like something you say at a crime scene. But there is a body. You just drop that phrase into your mind on the regular, you know, you can do it in your daily life, but in the meditation practice, you're walking at any speed. At night, you can't fall asleep, and so you get up and walk slowly, but it doesn't have to be crazily slow. There is a body that brings the mind to below the level of thought, to the physical sensations of the movement. Inevitably, you'll get distracted. You don't need to make a big deal out of that. You can, as my friend Jeff Warren likes to say, you can think about distraction and waking up as kind of like a natural rhythm, almost like the crashing of waves on a beach. You know, don't get too wrapped around the axle about distraction. There is a body. And then if you want to take it to, if that's not getting you concentrated enough, you can drop little notes into the mind, like moving or thinking or seeing or hearing. Just that it's a skillful use of thinking to direct you to your actual physical sensate experience. And so that's a version of the practice I do when I can't sleep.
Where do you walk? Like around your apartment?
We live in a house now because we moved out of the city. But I used to walk around the apartment, and now I walk around the house. And sometimes my wife has videos that I should put on Instagram, actually, of me walking around the house very slowly with a very embarrassing, gets picked up on the ring cams sometimes. And I'm wearing my cousin Deb, shout out Deb Berman. She got me one of those blankets that you can wear. I think it's called
like
a Snuggie. Yeah, it's a Snuggie. It's got this crazy hood on it. And so I'm walking around the house with the hood on. It looks.
This is the body.
Yes, yes. It looks very, very strange. So yeah, that's my life. Very sexy.
I mean, if someone saw you and heard you, they would think that you,
Well, I'm not saying there is a body out loud, just for the record.
Okay, good. Yeah. Inside voice, meditation voice. Okay. I'll give it a go. I know you're supposed to get out of bed when you can't sleep, and it is so hard for me to do because it feels like I'm giving up. It feels like the second I get up, then I'm just going to be more awake. And that if I just keep trying hard, if I just lay here and keep trying harder to sleep, that surely it'll happen.
You're training the brain in doing that, you're training the brain that the bed is a place of struggle.
I mean, I really do need to break this problem because it still feels that way to me. Every night that I go to sleep, I'm like, what's it going to be? What's going to happen tonight?
I have that too. And here's what I do. I basically put my hand on my chest. I'm like, dude, whatever happens, it's going to be cool. First of all, if you get no sleep, you've had that experience a million times, so you'll be fine tomorrow. And second, just get your ass out of bed and do some walking meditation. And even if that doesn't work, although it usually does, you're getting some meditation in. No lose scenario.
Do you set a timer?
No.
Like at what point?
No, I just stop when I'm good and tired.
Okay.
Sometimes if I'm like really pissed off, which is not unusual, and I'm anxious, because usually anger is like compensating for the fear, I have to do it a couple times before I fall asleep. You know, like I get back into bed and I'm still thrashing, and I just get back out of bed. And sometimes I do give up and just work for a while, you know, like I've really learned to make peace with insomnia.
I think the most powerful thing you said was to remind yourself that you've been here before. It's going to be okay, right? Like you don't need to panic about this. It's like any anxiety or fear that you struggle with. It's like this unwanted friend or this annoying friend. It's like don't be angry about it or at it. Just acknowledge it. I guess that's what you do in meditation. Like, I see you, thought. I see you, insomnia. And now I release you.
And friend is the right word, because it's just the organism trying to protect itself. It is trying to help you, but in a fucked up way that's not actually very helpful. But aggression will make it stronger, whereas friendship will defang it.
Okay, I'm going to walk. Do you walk in a circle? Do you walk in a line? I don't have a very big house.
You can walk in a circle. Yeah, that doesn't matter. It really... The how of the logistics of it matter way less.
Do you notice how I'm getting fixated on this? Like looking for reasons, like it's not going to work in my house. Sorry, Dan. Okay, I'm going to try.
Please do try that. I want to hear how it goes. Okay, but I want to get to the main event here, because you have a new show. So you were at Morning Edition for 6 years. Before that, you did lots of interesting stuff that we haven't even talked about. But Morning Edition for 6 years, then you did Enlighten Me for about a year. Just as a brief aside, if anybody wants to go back and listen to all those episodes, where and how would they be able to do that?
Put in your search engine of choice, Enlighten Me with Rachel Martin.
I'll put a link to that in the show notes. And so you did that. And then you came up with this brilliant idea for a new show. Like, it's a really brilliant show. I mean, I've listened to it. It's awesome. And so it's called Wild Card. Can you just describe how you came up with the idea and like what it is?
Yeah. So we wanted, my producer and I, his name is Lee Hale. He's wonderful, an amazing collaborator. He and I created Enlighten Me. He swims around in those same existential waters. We wanted to preserve kind of the heart of those Enlighten Me conversations, but also some of those can be real heavy, right? Like, some of them are downers. It's a lot about like grief and hard things. And I accept that people don't always want to live in that space. And it's also not representative of the emotion or thoughts that I want to put out into the world either. You know, the world is heavy enough. There's a lot of stuff going on to be sad about. And I really did want to make a show that made people feel light. I wanted it to make people feel seen and heard and understood and less lonely, and also lighter and more joyful. And so we were trying to figure out a way to tackle these soul-searching kind of questions, but to do it within a more playful architecture. And so we came up with this idea for a game. Now, we call it like an existential game show. It's a device to have a meaningful conversation, right? We came up with a deck of cards,
And look, these are real cards. It's so fun. They've got these big questions on them. And with each guest, we hold 3 at a time up, and they get to pick one card to answer. And they can't see what the question is. And I adhere to their wishes. I pick the one that they have selected randomly. And I love that because I get to surrender agency in this too. You know, like it's genuinely a surprise for me. And sometimes I'll be looking at these cards. I'll be like, oh God, please pick 3. 3's so good. And they'll be like, 2. 2. But I like 2 too. I just didn't like 2 as much as 3. But there's a serendipity to all of it. And not to get too woo-woo, but at the end of the thing, we had the conversation that we were meant to have. Things happened and we had this conversation. It could have gone a different way. And I sort of love that, you know? There's just a randomness to it and surprise that I didn't get to do as a news interviewer. I had to have control the whole time. You know, it's my show, it's my interview, and I am holding you to account, and this is how it's going to go. And also, we developed within the context of the game a way to put me into it because people will be more likely to be more vulnerable if I'm also in it in that way, right? It's only fair if I'm asking people to show up in this way that I also show up in that way. So people get a skip. If one question isn't speaking to them, they can just be like, skip. And the guests get a flip. And if they want, they can put me on the spot. I answer it first. They still have to answer it, but it buys them a little time. I also model an answer, you know? So it's been really cool because the guests have come out of it telling other people that they really appreciated the experience. And the feedback's been great. People have been appreciating what I love about it. And that's really affirming, you know, that it is this joyful, inspirational place where people can be real in a way that they're not often allowed to be.
The 10% Happier podcast is available early and ad-free over on our companion app, which is also called 10% Happier. No ads. And like I said, you get it early, about a week before everybody else does. Relatable wisdom, no distractions. Download the 10% Happier app wherever you get your apps. It really works. And I say this I mean this as the highest compliment. I'm a little jealous of it.
Thanks.
I hosted a game show and it was the best job I've ever had other than delivering pizza, which I also loved. And it was just so easy and lucrative, and I loved it. My point is that you're so right that this area of whatever you want to call it, meaning, existential questions, et cetera, it can come off almost definitionally gets very, very heavy. And so, but it doesn't have to be. You know, in Taoism they talk about the 1,000 sorrows and 1,000 joys. Like we often miss the whole upside of the situation, and so the whole thing could just get morose and self-serious and self-righteous, and so the fact that you've gamified it so successfully is awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm having a good time. I genuinely am. Yeah, I hope other people are too. So you want to do it?
Yes, let's do it.
Yeah. Okay, we're gonna play the game. So you just heard me say the rules. I'll just give them to you quickly again. You get one skip, Dan Harris. If you don't like a question, you can say skip, and then I'll replace it with another from the deck. You get one flip. You can flip it on me if you want. You don't have to use these tools, but they're there for your usage if you so choose. We're dividing it up into 3 rounds, okay, with a couple questions in each round. Memories, insights, and beliefs. And there's a prize at the end because it's a game. So I hope you win, Dan Harris. But it's cool. It's cool. Okay. So you ready?
Yes.
Okay, let's do it. Here's your first 3 cards. Memories. 1, 2, or 3.
3. Because you said before you liked 3. Even though this is a different 3, I'm just trying to hook
You're
you
just
up.
going with 3.
Yeah.
What's a place that shaped you as much as any person did?
Flip.
Oh, you just flipped right out of the gate.
Yeah. I need some time.
Okay. It's the first answer that comes to my mind, which I don't know if it's particularly illuminating, but I think, I mean, it's the town I grew up in because I think a lot of the things I ended up seeking in my life were in reaction to that place. And I wanted the opposite of that place in a lot of ways. I had a wonderful childhood, so many near and dear friends who still live in this community. It's a physical, it's beautiful. It's in Southeast Idaho. It's a lovely place to grow up. I found it very constricting and narrow. And I didn't fit in there, and I didn't know where I fit in. And I just knew that there had to be a different place. So the place that shaped me is the place that I really desperately wanted to leave, actually. And again, it's funny because now all I want to do is go back there, because it's just, life is so simple and it's really pretty. And I live in a city, and I always dream about going back to this place on the river and the cottonwood trees. Man, did I want to leave. It was a really conservative culture. It was a very, very religious community. And I wasn't in that religion either. Like, I was from a really religious family, but the dominant culture was LDS, was Mormon. And my dad liked to joke that we were persecuted religious minorities as Presbyterians. But it's a particular culture. The culture did not feel like home to me. And so it shaped me, because all my choices after that, after leaving, I just wanted the opposite of everything. And it led me to perhaps some riskier behaviors that I probably should have thought twice about. But I tried to live a life that in my 20s, at least, I wanted everything that was the opposite of that place, everything that was the opposite. So I think I came down somewhere in the middle. In middle age, you kind of recalibrate, and you take the things that, the good of where you came from and the upbringing you had, and you marry it with the other life experiences that were in juxtaposition to that place. And that's who I am today. That was a long answer. I bought you so much time, Dan Harris.
It was a great answer. It led me to my answer, which I think the place would be my childhood home. Now, I lived in 3 places when I was a kid. The first I don't remember. It was our first 2 years in Falls Church, Virginia. I don't remember any of that.
Oh, yep. Really? That's not too far from me here.
And then we moved to Newton, Massachusetts, and we lived in this little house. And then we moved again in 8th grade to the house next door. And I'm going to pick that second house, first of all, because that's where all my childhood memories are, really, most of them. But also, there was a reaction, a not dissimilar reaction to I had a very, idyllic childhood. At least what I remember is quite idyllic. My parents were very loving, and they loved each other, and but they were very frugal. And I think in their they came by it honestly. There were, in their parents had come up during the Depression, and so I remember them not putting the heat on very high in the winter, and having to wear, down jackets in the winter
throw on more
at
clothes,
night.
Dan.
Yes, exactly. And also, Newton's an interesting city. It's right outside of Boston, and it has public housing projects, and it also has Subner Redstone lived there.
Wow.
The guy who founded Paramount, Viacom, whatever.
Yeah.
So it has the full spectrum. And I remember really, especially as I got into junior high, was very unhappy about the fact that we lived in a very small house. My parents were academic physicians, so they're doctors, but not the kind of doctors who make a lot of money. Much of my 20s and 30s were really reacting against what I thought was this sort of limiting frugality, cheapness of my parents. And so we moved because I really bullied them into buying the bigger house next door. And they actually let me do that, which is very interesting to think about now that I have my own child.
Right. Be careful. I mean, it's going to be like, this Ford hatchback is not sufficient, Dad, for my 16th birthday. I will be having the Ferrari.
They had a Chevy Chevette, which was like a hatchback. And then they had like a poop brown Plymouth Valiant. And I remember like being really embarrassed. And my parents had what I thought were crappy cars. And some of the other kids came from, I mean, I had friends who were from the housing projects. A lot of them, probably most of my friends were like not the wealthy ones, but that I was comparing myself upwards economically, and it was making me miserable. And I think I probably made my parents pretty miserable too.
Did that govern your life choices early on? Yeah. In terms of what you wanted to do?
In some ways, yes. In some ways, no. Like if I was really motivated by money, like I would have become an investment banker or whatever. Well, I'm not good at math, so I probably wouldn't have been able to do any of that. But I mean, I picked journalism, which is not, as you know, you know, for some people, and I got very lucky. I got jobs that were very, you know, well compensated, but it's not by no means guaranteed when you go into the news business. Most journalists don't make that much money. So I don't think it governed my choices. Like I was determined to be rich no matter what. I definitely still have a lot of irrational anxiety around financial issues. When I can't sleep, it's usually that. Even though like the math doesn't support it, it's just this irrational fear that I have that I think comes from those winters of wearing the down jackets, which, by the way, we didn't need to do. They could have afforded to turn the heat up, but it's just this psychology, you know, and that gets handed down.
So when you can't sleep in the middle of the night, do you call your parents? You're like, hi, this is because of you. Turn up the damn heat.
My parents are not, they're alive, but they're not like, my dad had a stroke, so he's not callable.
Oh, I'm sorry.
My mom, I could call my mom, but we've definitely moved into that stage where I'm not an orphan, but I'm the parent. You know, I'm definitely playing the role of the parent, which is interesting.
Next question, still in memories. 1, 2, or 3?
I'll go with 1.
What's something someone told you that changed your trajectory?
The first memory that's coming up, and this is not like, I don't know, I want to come up with something Buddhist because that's on brand, but this is just what's coming up in my head. I did in college, I did a bunch of internships in TV news because I was really interested in TV news. And one of them was in public broadcasting, what was then called the McNeil-Lehrer News Hour.
Shut up.
Yes.
Really?
Yes. And now it's called the PBS News Hour.
That's right.
Hosted by Amno Nawaz, who used to be at ABC News and is a wonderful person.
And Jeff Bennett.
Bennett, who I don't know.
Who used to be my editor at Weekend Edition Sunday at NPR. Okay. Yeah. Wonderful show. So
I was the intern one summer for the business and economics correspondent, Paul Solman. And it was great. He was amazing. And he had this producer named Laurie Cohen, who was also amazing. And this was the summer of 1991. And I just learned a ton from them and really kind of fell in love with it. They were great storytellers. They would do these long form stories about businesses or economic issues. And Paul was just a great explainer of stuff. And so he was a great role model. And I remember when I graduated from college a couple of years later, I didn't know what I was going to do. And I kind of thought maybe I'll be a paralegal. And I was on the phone with, I thought maybe I would go to law school and I would start by being a paralegal. And I was on the phone with Lori and she was like, don't be an idiot. You like TV news. Like go to some small town and get a job on camera. And it utterly changed the trajectory of my life. If I had not had that phone conversation, I would probably be an unhappy lawyer right now.
Oh my God. Can I tell you, you and I are like the same in so many ways. The thing, you didn't flip it on me, but I'm going to tell you mine anyway. Because
I thought I only got one flip. That's why I didn't flip it.
We're pretending that you're on my show and I'm just taking the steering wheel. Because the thing that changed my life was when I was living in San Francisco and I was working at the public radio station, but I thought still maybe I should be a lawyer because my dad was a lawyer. But my lawyer dad had said, go interview these other people I know in San Francisco who are lawyers and see if they like their jobs. And this one guy I talked to, God bless Stephen Kravitz, because he looked at me after this hour-long lunch and said, if there is literally anything else that you'd like to do, go try that thing first before you go to law school. And I was like, I kind of dig journalism. I have zero experience, but anyway, then I did a bunch of stuff and got internships and jobs. But yes, so I too, there are a lot of journalists who almost were lawyers. Yeah. Phew.
Bullet dodged.
Next round. This is insights. Okay. Stuff you're working on, learning now. 3 new cards.
2.
How comfortable are you with being wrong?
Increasingly comfortable with being wrong. I think this is actually one of the things I've matured into and feel very passionate about, which is intellectual humility. I have gotten in the past the feedback, the very accurate feedback, that I had a verbal tick of saying, I might be wrong, but ... and then launching into several paragraphs about how I'm not wrong. And so I've really taken that when I see that coming up in my mind as like a interesting bit of feedback.
Yeah.
Just because what Joseph Goldstein sometimes says, like, certainty is not an indicator of truth. And often the certainty is compensating for some sort of doubt. There's like a subtle pain to dogmatism. Just tuning into that as I've gotten older has been really interesting and has very much improved my relationships. Because, yeah, I could just be obnoxious and arrogant and self-assured, which was, of course, covering up for all of, insecurity, et cetera, et cetera.
Kudos to that person who gave you that feedback. You know what I mean? Who, I don't know who it was, but the person was like, hey, you need to know that this is what you're doing and it's not awesome.
It was anonymous feedback. It was a part of a 360 review that I got. Which is the source, the subject of my next book, actually, this 360 review that was panoramically humiliating. So that was just one piece of tough advice.
I love that, though. We're still in insights.
3.
What makes you irrationally defensive?
Somebody says something that I interpret as pointing to me being a bad person. Because I suspect that I'm a bad person. And so that when people say things like, oh, well, that was an insensitive comment, or even worse, if it was somehow like bigoted in some way, I can go through the roof. This is another thing I've really worked on. There's a great concept from a friend of mine named Dolly Chugg, who I actually just had dinner with last night. Dolly is a professor at NYU Business School, and she is NYU Stern School of Business, and she has written several books. One of them is called The Person You Mean to Be, or something like that. Anyway, sorry, Dolly, if I'm screwing up the name of your book, but she has a concept called good-ishness. And it's great, because if you think of yourself not as a good person or a bad person, but as a good-ish person, which is what we all are, we're good-ish, but we're pretty good, but we make mistakes. Then when somebody points out that you've made a mistake, it doesn't challenge your identity as much. Because, of course, if you're good-ish, the mistakes are baked right in.
I've been trying to plant this seed in the minds of my kids. So, like I said, we don't go to church, but every once in a while on a Sunday, I'll be like, okay, it's Sunday school, and we'll sit on the couch, and I feel obliged to still like read a Bible verse, but then I try to make up a lesson or something. And what we've been talking about recently was that idea that people are not good or bad, that people are both, and at different points, one of those will be more present than the other. But I'm worried that this was too complicated to tell kids, that they need to learn. These are the good things to do. These are the bad things to do. But then I was like, I don't know. That's not real. That's not real. What's real is that all of us are both things, and one is more at the fore than the other sometimes. And that helps us, like you're saying, not judge ourselves too harshly. I mean, we still got to hold ourselves accountable for mistakes and bad behavior. But, it allows us to move on and not be defined by that mistake or that error, and to be more forgiving of other people when you realize, oh, that guy's such a jerk. And this kid is bullying me at school. And you make up a whole story about how they're just like this awful human being, and they must just love torturing me at school and taking my water bottle every time. And you got to, think about, it's a different way to teach empathy, I guess, is just thinking about a person as having both of those qualities simultaneously.
Do you think for you, this nuanced view of human nature has been bolstered by being a journalist, that you've gone out and interviewed people that you might have reflexively rejected if you were, a civilian bystander?
Totally. And I think
Now, not to get on my political soapbox, but I do think it is what is broken. I think it's a big thing that is broken in our culture right now, is the vilification of other people and the inability to recognize the duality in all of us, and the good and the bad, or the mistakes we make, or the views we hold, and somehow not be able to see the good in one another. And I don't care if that sounds like Pollyanna-ish. I don't care, because it's just a sad, broken way to live if you cannot look at a person with whom you disagree, or a person who has made grave mistakes, a person who has perhaps hurt you deeply, and to be able to also see good in that person that maybe they didn't show to you in that moment, but it is there. And I just think we don't do that. I just think we've lost the capacity to do that in a way that I think is dangerous.
We're heading into what is, likely to be, and is already, a hellscape, a dumpster fire of a presidential election in the United States. What do you recommend for people in order to survive the news, given everything you just said?
I think it gets back to appreciation, because it's about people too. It's not just, I'm appreciating my backyard right now, and I'm appreciating the fact that I got 7 hours of solid sleep, and I'm appreciating my kids. It's like learning to appreciate people. It's learning to appreciate their backstory. It's learning to appreciate where they came from. What were the influences that helped shape them, how they see the world. It's not the same as me. Different forces shaped them. The forces that shaped me aren't any more legitimate than the forces that shaped them, Seeking that kind of understanding and empathy, I think is crucial.
I really agree with what you just said, and I think it can ease the pain of this story, of like consuming this news story or any other news story that's contentious, if you can just view it with some subtlety. It seems like it's going to be satisfying to view the world in black and white and good guys and bad guys, but it actually makes everything more painful, and it is counterintuitively more easeful to sip from the cup of empathy, I think, and to understand that if you came out of the womb of the person whose behavior you're disapproving of, you might exhibit that exact same behavior.
I think it's comfortable. It's easy. It's a little lazy, if I'm being honest, to exist in that kind of binary of the good and the bad, the good and the evil, and this person's right and this person's unequivocally wrong. And I think that doesn't do us any good as a people.
Yep.
Last round. Beliefs. I know it's your show, but right now it's my show. 1, 2, or 3?
1.
So bossy. 1. Have you made peace with mortality?
Definitely not, although it is a goal of mine. In fact, last summer, my wife and I went and got tattoos. Neither of us had any tattoos. And so we each got something that we wanted to be reminded of regularly tattooed on our left wrist, right near our watches. So she got the expression, which comes from a Buddhist monk, right now it's like this, which is kind of a recipe for equanimity, which is that you're giving yourself permission to feel whatever's happening right now, but to know that it's only for right now, and that everything changes for better or worse. And I got an acronym, FTBOAB, for the benefit of all beings, which is kind of off-brand in its earnestness, but it's a reminder that my job really is, if I'm doing my job correctly, it is to be useful. And that is actually the mind state in which I feel the best. And so, and yet I am wired for a sort of fear-based acquisitiveness. And so it's nice to have this right next to my watch because I see it all the time and it's so helpful. And so to answer your actual question, Bianca now wants to get tattoos on our right arms, and I was trying to think of what it would be. And there's a phrase in the Buddhist teachings that Joseph Goldstein uses a lot, which is, I'm not exempt, which means that, and the Buddha said this a lot, which is, there's aging and illness and dying all around us, and you're not exempt. And yet we feel like somehow we are. But to remind yourself every day that you are not exempt from nature. You can compute it in a morbid way, but actually it wakes you up.
I think about death a lot, like more than the average person. but I don't think people would describe me as someone who lives in like this morose, macabre state. I think it is the other side of that coin of appreciating and creating meaning and imbuing things with a sacred quality.
When you're thinking about death, like what form does that take? Is there a practice, or is it just kind of, it comes up every once in a while?
Well, it does get a little grim because my imagination can go wild. I imagine dying. I imagine my family. I was doing it today. Like, okay, if I were to die, and I imagine the grief of the people I left behind, but then I think to myself, they're going to be okay. They're going to be okay. You know, they will be okay. And so I don't know. I play these little games with myself just to think about worst case scenarios. It drives my husband absolutely mad because he's like, fine, he's fine. And all of a sudden I'll be like, but what if this? And he's like, oh my God, I hadn't thought about that. And I'm like, but it'll be fine. Like, I've made my peace with that. And now I'm back up here. And he's like, but now I'm here. And this is so bad. But yeah, I don't know. It is just a reminder of the ephemeral nature of the whole experiment of living and how lucky we are to get another day. So this is your last question. These are still in the big picture beliefs.
2.
Does the idea of an infinite universe excite you or scare you?
Both, but more exciting. I mean, it's just so interesting to think like, so if it's infinite,
right?
Every possible permutation of this conversation is playing out somewhere else. Is that, or would that require a multiverse? I don't know. I mean, this is just fascinating, brain-breaking stuff, which is very cool to think about. And then, of course, there's the thing of, like, if it's indeed infinite, why have we not seen any signs of life? There are all sorts of theories about this. They're here, but we're not seeing them, or that's what the UFOs are all about. Or I've also heard the theory that there have been many intelligent life forms on other planets, but what happens every time is they invent AI and it destroys them, and it's about to happen to us. And so I have no idea, but it's all fun to think about. What do you think?
I mean, I think there is a world in which it freaks me out a little bit, and it's disconcerting because I fight for my own. I lose perspective about who we are. Like, who am I in this big thing of which there is no end? If it just keeps going and going and going, and who am I in that? It immediately leads me to questions about death too, and whether or not any part of us lives on in the infinityness of it all afterwards. Issa Rae told me this in a conversation with her. She doesn't like the idea of forever of anything. And I was like, oh, I don't know. Like, I promised to be married forever. But I really understood what she said. Like, it just, the idea of an infinite universe is sort of disconcerting. The idea of, if you subscribe to the idea of an afterlife, some kind of heaven construct that you're just going to be like there forever. Like, what if it gets old? Like, what, you just need to change the scenery. I always needed to change my jobs on Earth. Like, I need change. What if you can't get out of that? So, I don't know. I choose, because we've been talking so much about how you get to choose things and we're all in charge of our own meaning. I choose to be enthralled and excited about it, and I choose not to be afraid of it. And that's the same with death too, and the infiniteness of that inevitability. All we can do is appreciate the here and now and not get too twisted up in like whatever the hell is after, or whatever the hell is out there in its infinity playing out in the multiverse.
In thinking about the infinite universe and the threat that might pose to your little ego, and I'm not talking about you specifically, one's little ego, it's actually like you are everything and nothing at the same time, right? Because you are an expression of the universe. Every thought you have is an expression of the universe. It's all nature. And so in that way, there's really nothing to you, but then you're also inexorably and interwoven into everything. So it's that kind of interesting paradox, and others have said it way better and more poetically, but that's I think the sentiment that I would embrace.
I love that, though, that we are everything and nothing. I like that. I mean, it allows you to be the good and the bad, and I find that kind of freeing. I want it all. I want to be all those things.
It's so funny. We came out of a business where like this kind of subtlety is not rewarded with clicks or by the algorithm. Like the media business does not dig this kind of nuance. So we kind of landed in the right spots ultimately.
Yeah, I think so. Oh, okay, we're not done because you won. I don't know if you were
How does one win?
Yeah, I don't know. Everybody
wins,
Dan.
right?
It's
yes.
like a second grade soccer team. Everybody wins. So your prize, Dan Harris, is a trip in our memory time machine. I want you to choose a moment to travel to in our memory time machine that you would not change anything about. It's just a moment you would like to linger in a little longer.
Summer after my junior year in high school, where I was a terrible student in high school. My parents were distraught about this. I had a thriving weed business.
Did you?
Yeah, I was a bad boy. I got arrested a bunch.
Oh my God.
Yeah. My parents referred to my friend group as the Brain Trust, and not in a very sarcastic way. And I started later in high school to get a little. My parents had been very, 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 very academic. They were both professors at Harvard Medical School, and so the fact that their son was en route to gas station attendant was not no disrespect on my part to gas station attendants. This is what my father used to say behind my back, that he thought I was going to end up as a gas station attendant. So the fact that I started to do a little bit better in high school later on was very encouraging to them. And I chose to go to summer school the year after my junior year in high school at Harvard, which is not like getting into Harvard. Like anybody could get into the summer school.
Right.
I believe.
I'm like,
So
wow.
this was
That
not
pop business.
Yeah, exactly.
Something
yes.
was working
I
for
had
you
some
if you got
spare
into
change. Yep. So I got into it was not a big deal to get into this thing, but anyway, I was surrounded by all these smart kids, and that was really fun for me. And I realized, that I kind of wanted to go in this direction in my life and to be a little bit more achievement oriented. And anyway, that almost has nothing to do with the actual moment that I'm going to tell you about, which is I was sitting on the steps one night on a warm evening in Harvard Square, in Harvard Yard, outside of some building where I had just taken some really cool course. And I was hit with this big wave of equanimity for no reason. And this happens once in a while in meditation. I now recognize in retrospect the experience, but I just got hit by a big wave of okayness. Everything's fine.
Huh.
And there were no external molecules involved. I was just sitting there. And I just, that memory is in my bones. I just remember that feeling, and I've touched it a few times on retreat, meditation retreat, that is. And so, yeah, that's what came up in my mind. I'm going to just flip on every one of these now. So please.
It reminded me of a moment I actually hadn't thought of in a really long time. I had taught English in Japan after I graduated from undergrad. And I left that. I was supposed to stay for 2 years. I left after a year and a half because I was just very lonely in this very small town. And I came back and did the most American thing ever. I just bought a bright red Jeep Cherokee. It's a big, irresponsible American car. And I moved to Jackson Hole, and I lived by myself. I didn't really know anyone, but I was just I went on a hike, and I was just standing at the top of some mountain pass. I don't remember what trail it was or anything, but I do remember sort of feeling what you just described, unprovoked. I mean, I'm in nature, so I guess that's, stuff like this happens in nature. But it was really different. It was a different kind of feeling. It was just like this relief and joy. And it was different for me to feel that with no people around, you know? And I had come out of this experience being so lonely and spending so much time alone and not being okay with that. It didn't feel good. I wasn't happy with my own company. But somehow in that particular moment, I felt very okay in my own company in that place. And I like that.
So I didn't earn the prize. I don't know why you're giving me the prize, but all the roles are reversed in this whole, I'm on your show, you're on my show. But that was really fun.
It was.
Thank you.
The prize really is that I finally got to get you on my show. So thank you. Thank you for doing this. I genuinely appreciate it.
I really, really appreciate it. Well, you and I don't know each other that well, Dan.
No, we don't.
But it's funny because I feel like we do. And through this, I don't know, when you made your big job change, I was like so proud of you, which is a funny thing to say to a person you don't know well. But I just looked at you from afar. I was like, I bet that was hard. And I'm so proud of him for choosing that. So this is me telling you that I'm still very proud.
We're right back at you. Right back at you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can you just remind everybody of the name of the show and where they can hear it?
I most definitely can. It is called Wild Card with Rachel Martin. And the cool thing about this, so it's a podcast. It drops on Thursdays. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts. For you radio heads out there, it also is on the radio. There's a shortened version of it that airs on All Things Considered on Sunday evenings. So that's where you can hear it.
I can vouch for it. It's a great, I mean, anybody who's listened now knows how great it is, but I've heard the actual episodes and they're fantastic, in particular the Issa Rae one. So great job. Thank you again. And
thanks, man.
Yeah, I'll be listening.
Cool. Thank you.